back to yet another episode of Ball with Y'all, the season finale here of season 2. We are so glad that you chose to join us. This is our 48th episode, dating all the way back to last September. So whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, or at YouTube at BWY Productions, we are so glad that you chose to spend a little bit of your day here with us. Of course, we are coming off of a jam-packed weekend with a number of headlines. Suffice to say, given that we are an SEC show, I don't think I really have to tell you what our main story will be, but we do have a lot to cover here today. So hopefully you're ready for a full ride. And also, I mentioned just about a week ago that we had a big reveal to announce in today's show. Now, I will say you have to hold on till a little bit later in the show to hear that big reveal, but trust me, you will want to stick around because it has some pretty massive implications for season 3 of our show. With that said, let's get into story number 1. I want to start story number 1 with a bit of a story from my own life. About 5 years ago, I had the honor and the privilege of serving as a youth leader at my local church, right? And it was a great opportunity because I got to pour into these kids, right? And I actually had just graduated high school myself, so many of them, I was either close friends with them or I was in classes with them or we went on trips together. So I was pretty close with many of these kids already, right? And, you know, the really cool thing about it, toward the end of my first year with the youth group as a youth leader, they instituted these things called houses. And if you know anything about these houses, you probably heard me tell a story a million times over. These houses were like these little subgroups, if you will, of the youth group. So instead of just having everyone together, you'd have the middle schoolers and then the freshmen and the sophomore house and the junior house and the senior house, of course. And I had the opportunity to lead the sophomore house. And the first night we had everyone pick colors, and I may or may not have cheated just a little bit to get the color red. And so all of a sudden we became the red house. Now, before I get too far down the story, I do think it's important that I acknowledge who our youth pastor was. His name was Jacob. He's a regular listener of our show, actually, so hopefully he's tuning in today. And Jacob was a really big proponent of what we would do with the Red House and also of what the goal of houses was throughout the youth group. And he watched all of this unfold, right? And sometimes he had to, you know, help us overcome some fires, if you will, along the way. But one of the interesting things that came about when we had these houses was the idea of competition, of games, of really pointless games. They didn't really have a whole lot of benefit. They didn't really do a lot for you. There were no prizes at that point in time beyond just bragging rights, but we would play games every single week. And for whatever reason, I tapped into this unshakable competitiveness within my group. And all of a sudden, the Red House just started winning everything. Right? It wasn't even fair. It was almost like the Golden State Warriors out here playing the Charlotte Hornets or the Alabama Crimson Tide playing the Akron Zips. It was apples and oranges, right? And to be fair, I didn't really handle it too well either, right? I was a little extra competitive. And, you know, when you win a lot and you don't really behave the right way, that raises a lot of questions. And you have a lot of people saying a lot of things. And it leads to a lot of arguments, right? As you can imagine. And the funny thing about those arguments, sometimes I even argue with Jacob. I mean, I tried not to, but sometimes it happened. And most of those times when we would argue, whether it was me and Jacob or whoever else, they were pointless arguments. And usually I was on the wrong side of that argument. Usually I was wrong in that argument. But my ego would not let me acknowledge the fact that I was wrong or let the other person know that I knew that I was wrong. Whether they thought that I was wrong or not did not matter to me, but I could not let them know that I knew that or let them know that I might know that. So I would fight. I would argue. I would quarrel about just ridiculous things, right? And all in the spirit of competitiveness and trying to be the best that we could be and really just driving the Red House forward. Well, that didn't work out in the end, and the Red House died, and that was the end of it, right? And it was fine. But the ultimate point there was that we would just argue about nothing. And I was always, usually, in the wrong side of the picture. But I would just keep arguing, and I would do it emotionally without actual reason or fact or basis to really get behind that argument. And I say all that because a week ago, I guess basically today, a week ago tomorrow as well, we saw one of the most absurd situations unfold in the SEC world, where we saw a moron in College Station, Texas, do exactly that. He reminded me of myself, emotionally arguing over something just because he knew he was wrong, where he didn't really have a whole lot of fact. He just started making accusations that didn't really have any basis, but his emotions got the better of him, and he knew that he couldn't let anyone else know that he was wrong. Of course, I am referring to our dear friend, Coach Jimbo Fisher for the Texas A&M Aggies. So let's start at the beginning of that whole situation, if you will. Let's start with the facts. I think it's important to start with the facts. We'll start with Wednesday night. What did Coach Saban say? Well, of course, he was sitting right next to Nate Oates, the men's basketball coach for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and he was talking to a room full of boosters, essentially, local business owners in the Birmingham area. And he said that Texas A&M bought their entire class. And he also said that name, image, and likeness and the lack thereof when it comes to rules has allowed that to be legal, right? He said that. I mean, he didn't explicitly say this, but you could assume that he was saying that without name, image, and likeness, Texas A&M likely would not have the number one overall class. Okay, right? What did Nick Saban not say last Wednesday? Well, he didn't say that Texas A&M cheated. There's a lot of talk out there saying that A&M that Saban called A&M or Jimbo Fisher cheaters. Well, he didn't say that at all, actually. He also did not say that Alabama is immune to name, image, and likeness ramifications or doing it themselves, right? He made the comment that they didn't buy a single player, but I think, and we'll kind of get more into this too later when I talk about how Jimbo says he hasn't lied, but he's not really telling the full truth either. I think that's some of what Saban did as well. And also, Saban didn't say anything personal about his former assistant, Jimbo Fisher. But what was implied? What did the media or whoever turn Saban's comments into? Well, they said that Saban called Deion Sanders, of course, with the Jackson State Panthers, I think, and also Jimbo Fisher. He said that the implication out there was that he called them cheaters. Well, again, I just told you he did not say that anyone cheated, but that's what people think, and that's what Jimbo Fisher seemed to think. And the other implication that I've seen a lot is that Nick Saban is scared right now, that he feels threatened in the recruiting world by the lack thereof when it comes to name, image, and likeness regulations. Well, we'll come back to Saban in a bit because there's a lot to unpack here, as I'm sure you can imagine. What did Jimbo say Thursday? Well, and also in the days after, but mainly on Thursday. Well, he said a ton of derogatory things about his former head coach in the form of Nick Saban. He also said the word despicable 8 times, right? If you were counting at home, I hope you were. And he also said the word amazing far too many times, too many times to count. It was, he almost said it like he didn't really know what else to say. So he just said, that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, it wasn't really all that amazing now, was it? He said that Coach Saban needed to be slapped. And he also jokingly called Nick Saban the czar of football, this egotistic, narcissistic guy who is only stuck up his own rear end, essentially, right? Well, what didn't Jimbo Fisher say on Thursday? I just told you he said a lot of things, but what didn't he say? Well, he didn't actually say anything tangible about name, image, and likeness. He kind of avoided the whole topic and just started to tarnish his former head coach. And he also didn't really say anything that actually addressed what Saban was talking about, because again, I go back to Saban was talking about the lack of regulation when it comes to name, image, and likeness rules, and how that has allowed places like Texas A&M and some other schools out there to really benefit, if they have the funds to do it, to help their recruiting classes. Now, what did Jimbo Fisher imply? Well, first off, he implied or even directly said that he and to that extent Texas A&M have no involvement whatsoever with the collective. Now, I want to take a moment here to talk about the collective. The collective, it feels like this, it's like this vague, unknown realm of wherever name, image, likeness deals take place, they happen through the collective. Alabama has a collective, A&M has a collective, a number of schools have collectives. And, earlier when I mentioned that Nick Saban said he didn't buy a single player, well, here in this case, Jimbo Fisher is just talking about how he is not involved with the collective, but he has no clue what the collective does. Okay, well, clearly he knows what the collective does, but whatever. But by deferring to the collective, Nick Saban and to that extent Jimbo Fisher are kind of taking the onus off themselves, because then you can say, oh, well, I didn't buy the players. Well, I did not direct the money. Well, in a roundabout way, I guess you didn't, right? So that's one thing that Jimbo implied that I think was pretty smart on both of their behalves, if you will. Also, he implied that Saban is dirty. He said numerous times, if you go dig into Nick Saban's past, watch out for what you will find. You'll find something you do not want to find. All right, well, I mean, you last worked with him over 2 decades ago, so I don't know how true that is, but, all power to you. So those are the facts. Let's dissect it just a little bit more. I think you kind of already know where this is going now that I've laid out all those facts, but let's go into it a little bit more. In my opinion, Nick Saban said absolutely nothing wrong last Wednesday. In fact, I took it as more of a warning. In 2013, right, after Auburn and a number of other schools started to really take advantage of the lineman down the field rule and so on, that really seemed to benefit the offenses. Nick Saban said, this isn't right. This is against the game of football, et cetera, et cetera. He complained and nobody really listened to him. Well, fast forward 6, 7, 8 years, and Tua Tagovailoa and Mac Jones and Bryce Young are benefiting from those same rules that Nick Saban complained about in 2013. See, Nick Saban sought to have some sort of reform to benefit the game of football, to level the playing field a little bit. But then when nobody really seemed to care, no, there were no rule changes or anything like that, he said, okay, fine, I will just go out there and benefit from it myself. And I'll become the best at it as a result. It also reminded me, it was like 2019, 2020, somewhere in that realm. You saw a lot of transfers, right? And Nick Saban said, listen, the transfer market is dangerous because you're going to have all these top schools go out there and just start cherry picking all the best prospects from other schools. And nobody kind of really listened to him there either. But fast forward a couple years later, right? He gets Jamison Williams from Ohio State. He goes out there and gets Jahmyr Gibbs and Mr. Burton from Georgia, and goes out there and gets Eli Ricks from LSU. And all of a sudden, he has one of the top classes in the country if you combine the recruiting with the transfer market. So another idea where he said the transfer portal was not necessarily a good thing for the sport, and still went out there and became the best at it, even after complaining. He said, listen, I would like to see some reform here. Nobody does anything about it. So he goes out there and just takes care of business himself. So I saw this as more of a warning. When Nick Saban sees something that he too can exploit, before he exploits it, he calls it out, right? He says, hey, this thing right here, that's not good for the game, right? And I generally think he generally is looking out for the best interest of the game. He has 7 championships. He's not trying to go out there and win 1,000,000 championships. He wants to see these young men succeed, I would tend to think, right? He's done everything that he needs to do. He's already hit the peak of college football. He's got it, right? I genuinely believe that he knows that name, image, and likeness and the lack of rules that are around it right now is dangerous for the game of football. But somehow, in him saying it here, it's controversial. Well, I think you would tend to agree with me. If we keep going down the path that we're going, it's a little dangerous for the long-term outlook of college football, and to that extent, college sports as well. And one other thing he said the day after the remarks, he kind of gave a backhanded apology to Jimbo Fisher and to that extent, Deion Sanders. I don't really feel like it was necessary because, again, he didn't say anything wrong, in my opinion. Now, as far as Jimbo goes, in my opinion, I think he took things to an unnecessary point, right? It was pretty clear to me that he was just angry because he knew Nick Saban was right, that Nick Saban had said exactly the truth, and he was trying to walk it back or trying to get around it without lying because he said he wasn't a liar, because he said he wasn't a cheater, and so on. And nobody is saying that Jimbo Fisher is a cheater. We're just sitting here, at least I'm sitting here and saying that you are benefiting from having all these boosters in your state with oil money running in their backyard. They can just pay whoever, whatever. And all of a sudden you have your best recruiting class ever as the Texas A&M head coach. it kind of makes a lot of sense, right? He responded to facts that Nick Saban presented with a tremendous amount of emotion. And he did it so pretty poorly as well. And he offered a ton of really vague accusations that didn't really even seem to support. He couldn't really support those accusations from what I could tell. From what it seemed, it was just more of just general comments like, hey, you should probably go check him out instead of paying attention to me. I mentioned that he had the best recruiting class to ever exist, right? When it comes to, I mean, he's broken every single record that was ever there. He, in his first 3 or 4 years at A&M, his years prior, since he joined from Florida State, he has more 5-star recruits this class in the 2022 class than he did combined those years prior. So you're going to sit here and tell me that name, image, likeness had no impact on this incoming class or the future classes that they're already doing well on? Well, I think it's pretty clear there's something about that just does not add up. And for Jimbo to act so flippantly and emotionally without actual basis, again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me as someone who's trying to look at this pretty objectively. Now, it's pretty clear to me that Jimbo has not liked Nick Saban for quite some time. But like I said, keep in mind, they haven't coached together for like 2 decades, right? So I don't think of like a Kirby Smart and a Nick Saban relationship or a Lane Kiffin and a Nick Saban relationship the same as I think of Jimbo and Nick Saban. They're really like distant cousins at this point, maybe like pen pals, if that, at least leading up to the comments that Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher made last week. With that said, I do want to make one comment. Jimbo, he played this brilliantly. He played to his base, right? He reminded me of a politician when you get accused of something or you're trying to fire up your supporters and you say something that you know they're going to get behind. That's exactly what he did, right? He went after the big dog. And all of a sudden, Texas A&M, who has this second-tier mentality, this B school mentality, who wants to be an A school, but they just haven't been there yet. Well, we just went after the big dog. Look at us, right? Well, in this case, he was playing to his base because he knows that's what they want to hear. And he was squeezing every ounce of bulletin board material out of this moment, and also trying to build up some hype for his team as they go into another year where they just pulled off the improbable and beating Alabama last October. What are the odds they're going to do it on October 8th? Probably pretty low, right? But these moments right here, he's juicing it every single ounce that he can get. And like I said, neither of them lied throughout this whole thing either. Well, sort of. Ultimately, they both played it pretty well, all things considered. Ultimately, I probably would have wished that Nick Saban had not said anything at all, so we didn't have this situation. But this also gave us something to talk about for our season finale. So I am okay with it in any case. Now, why does this conversation matter? Right? Moving away from Saban and from Fisher, why does this conversation even matter right now? On May 25th, why does it matter? Why does name, image, and likeness and the lack of rules around it, why does it matter? Well, it's obvious that name, image, and likeness is changing things right now. For a long time, Nick Saban's model for success was that all you had to do was to be the best at A, winning championships, winning college football championships, and B, be the best at setting your guys up for success at the next level. Nick Saban, all he had to do was put up tape of Julio Jones and Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry and Calvin Ridley and Amari Cooper and say, hey, you could do that. And you can make millions by doing that, by sticking here for 3 years, winning a championship or 2, and going on to become a first-round draft pick and have a guaranteed contract coming out of your degree and so on, right? That was his model, and it worked for so long. But name, image, and likeness has all of a sudden changed that conversation where, for example, the rumor has it that Deion Sanders paid that one young man, is it Hunter, I believe, that was going to go to Florida State, then shipped it up to Jackson State. The rumor has it that he got $1 million to go to Jackson State. All right, that's fine, right? But he's never going to win a championship at Jackson State, right? And he's probably not going to make the NFL. So he just traded in his long-term potential at major earnings for a short-term payoff, right? As did every single one of the A&M players that were bought. Well, they just potentially traded in their long-term potential for short-term gain, because who's to say that Jimbo Fisher is going to help them actually put themselves in position to get drafted high and have guaranteed contracts and make millions upon millions upon millions? Well, not that likely, right? Compared to some other schools out there, compared to the Clemsons of the world, the LSUs, the Georgias, the Alabamas. Now, A&M could get there, and this isn't particularly so much referring to A&M, but any school out there who has the resources to do it, well, all of a sudden now you can talk these players into focusing on short-term wealth over their future potential. And that brings us back to what Nick Saban said in the first place. He said that we need name, image, and likeness policy. We need some sort of regulation. It can't just be a free-for-all, right, where the rich get richer and they get whoever they want, and the folks who have the money to do whatever they want will stand tall above the rest. And what was fitting about all this was in the hours or minutes, in some cases, after all this unfolded, we found out that Jordan Addison, the Biletnikoff winner from Pittsburgh, is going to USC. He's transferring. And rumor has it he's getting paid pretty handsomely to do it. And he's getting paid on par with his former teammate, Kenny Pickett, who is now an NFL quarterback, getting guaranteed money after a first-round draft pick. So you're telling me this one guy who could have stuck around in Pittsburgh, which I don't blame him if he didn't want to stick around in Pittsburgh without his quarterback, he's going over to USC now. And who knows how much money USC or their collective is paying him to go over there. But again, he's not really worried about his long-term outlook. Right now, he's focused on his short-term gain. And in this case, the rich continue to get richer. Pittsburgh does not have the money at all to compete with USC. Texas was in the conversation. They had the resources, but you wouldn't have seen Oregon compete with USC in this conversation. You probably wouldn't have seen Arizona State compete with USC in this conversation. So again, the rich keep getting richer, and that's the danger of name, image, and likeness as it stands currently. And reform, in my opinion, will continue to benefit players, right? It'll protect players. It will help these 17, 18-year-old kids from making ill-advised decisions just because they want to make a quick 100,000, quick 200,000, quick 500,000, which is great and all. If you invest it and you make millions, cool, great. You're a lot better than we are right now in the stock market. But generally speaking, you're not going to put that money to good use. You're going to blow through it. And all of a sudden, this short-term gain that you were going to get immediately out of high school is not really that beneficial to you 2-3 years down the road. So having reform protects these players. Now, another thing about it that makes even more sense in my brain, right? Which very rarely do I make sense in my own brain, but I think this is one of those moments. I think a great parallel is you look at Najee Harris, you look at Devontae Smith, you look at Justin Herbert, 3 guys in recent history who could have left college after their 3rd year, right? And stuck around for that 4th year and created additional value for themselves. Najee Harris, Devontae Smith were going to be fringe 1st round, 2nd round draft picks, right? Well, they ended up both going in the 1st round after being Heisman finalists in the top 5 in 2020. And of course, Devontae Smith winning it in 2020. And Justin Herbert, a guy out of Oregon who he was good his 3rd year. He was a lot better his 4th year. Every single decision you make as a college athlete is a bet on yourself. Justin Herbert could have come back for year 4 and torn his ACL. And all of a sudden, that value he built up for himself after 3 years is down the drain. But ultimately, that is where we are. Every single decision is a bet on yourself. And in my personal opinion, as you sit here today, if we do not protect these players, they are making decisions, betting on themselves that is not in their best interest. And I couldn't really care less, honestly, what Jimbo Fisher says or wants. He is a total moron. But like I said, he has made the most out of what should have been a relative non-issue. So while he's a moron, I would say that he's a brilliant moron. On to story number 2. We had the All-Star race on Sunday, and it was a doozy, to say the least. We had a lot of our top guys go out for a number of reasons. Those tires that I talked about before, they took out what felt like half the field on Sunday. Our favorites like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, all knocked out due to some wild accidents. There was one moment, of course, where they took out Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, and Ross Chastain, where Busch had blown the tire. He tried to cut low. Ross Chastain tried to miss him and then did not miss him. Ended up sideways. I don't know how he ended up upright. I thought he was going to end up on his head at one point in time. Clip the end of Chase Elliott, ruined his day as well. You hate to see it, but it's the All-Star race. Luckily, it didn't really matter a whole lot for those folks. We also saw Tyler Reddick. He didn't even advance past the opening round of the All-Star race to get into the main race after wrecking in, I believe it was stage 3 in that All-Star Open. We also saw Logano's team, his pit team, came on pretty strong, I got to say, right? They went out there and took care of business. They went out there and got their driver into, I believe, the third spot in that final stage, and also won themselves a pretty good chunk of change in the end as well. And to that extent, it was a great night for Ford, particularly for Ryan Blaney. Now, that was a really wild situation at the end, if you happen to catch it, of course. Ryan Blaney, well, earlier in the broadcast, they said, listen, the only special thing about this race, there's a lot of special things, but the only special thing in the final stage is you have to finish the race under green. Now, for those of you who don't really know what that means or why it matters, normally if you get the white flag, the next flag ends the race. So if it's a caution that comes out after when it's one to go, okay, cool. Whoever's leading at that point when the caution flies, that's the race winner. Or if the race leader gets the checkered flag, then he wins the race. It's the next flag wins, right? Normally that's the case, but in the All-Star race, you have to finish under green. So if a caution flag flies before that checkered flag flies, well, that's a caution, and we got to run it back. And you didn't win the race. So just before Ryan Blaney passes the start-finish line to collect that checkered flag, we see the caution flag wave. And Ryan Blaney didn't realize it. He thought he won the race. His crew chief, his spotter, told him, hey, you just won the race. Congrats. You won $1 million. You are rich. Just about as rich as our friend at Jackson State, Mr. Hunter. Travis Hunter? Is that his name? Yeah, in any case. So Ryan Blaney starts to unfasten his netting along the door. And then he finds out, oh, wait, I didn't actually win. There was a caution. We gotta get lined back up. So now he's over here trying to reattach his net. And apparently that's like a 2 or 3 person job. And now Ryan Blaney with his scrawny arms is over here trying to reattach the net while driving, while keeping pace with the pace car in front of him. Now, ultimately, he won the race, right? He was allowed to, by NASCAR, to go out there with a partially secure net and stave off Denny Hamlin and a couple other folks for the win on Sunday to keep that $1 million prize. So all is well that ends well. But I was a little concerned and a little surprised, admittedly, by what unfolded Sunday night in that final stage after that last caution. Because I was honestly hoping that NASCAR would say, hey, Ryan Blaney, come down pit road, get your crew to fasten your net back up, because I understand why you unfastened it. Like, just go ahead and come back down, get it fastened back up. You will not lose your position. We want to make sure you're safe. That's what I was hoping NASCAR would do. Well, they didn't do that. In fact, they just waited until he kind of had it up, like, to the point, close enough. It looked good, but it wasn't really great. Like, it wasn't secure. Like, if you really had a bad accident, that thing was probably going to come back down. And they said, it's just 2 laps, right? He'll be fine. And it's not the first time that NASCAR has sacrificed safety. Of course, it was just about a year ago when they went to Coda, and you might recall it was pouring, and Martin Truex Jr. ended up on fire, and Cole Custer was all over the place, and Kevin Harvick and all these guys who just could not see anything because NASCAR was not willing to take a step, to take a moment, to really understand what the safety risks were, and just proceeded to go full speed ahead. So if I learned anything from the All-Star race, beyond the fact that it really, really sucked for those of us who had a favorite in the race, was that NASCAR needs to spend a little bit more time on their safety standards, because clearly they were not all that worried about Ryan Blaney's net. And maybe, I mean, ultimately it didn't really matter a lot, but what if, right? You always have to wonder, what if? And I think now is the time, and hopefully NASCAR does this. Now is the time to really consider what NASCAR is doing from a safety standpoint moving forward. But nonetheless, congratulations to Ryan Blaney. You are now $1 million richer. And we are moving on to Charlotte this coming Sunday for the Memorial Day weekend race, which is always a cool spectacle, right? And NASCAR handles holiday races well. While they don't handle safety well whatsoever, they really do handle holiday races pretty well, better than any other sport, in my opinion. Who do we like this week? Well, Chase Elliott, in 10 career races here at Charlotte Motor Speedway, his average finish is 12th with 5 top 5s and 1 win. Denny Hamlin, in 30 career races, his average finish is also 12th with 10 top 5s, but he has never won here. And also Austin Dillon, a name we haven't mentioned too much this year. In 13 career races here at this track, his average finish is 16th with 4 top 10s and 1 win. All that said, I'll ride with somebody who he's won here twice, right? He needs a win to keep his playoff hopes alive. I am going to ride with Brad Keselowski. He's ran this track nearly 24 times, and he knows what it takes to get to victory lane. I'll take Brad Keselowski to keep the momentum going for Ford this week by getting to victory lane. On to story number 3. This isn't really much of it really isn't much of a story, honestly. It's, I told you that this is the end of season 2. So sad, right? So sad. We've had a really fun season, right? I think this is 18 or 19 episodes here this season. A great deal of fun, and it's all because of the support you provided us. Now, we've continued to grow and improve with each season, and I would tend to think we've done that here as well. And trust me, that will not stop in season 3. Our upcoming hiatus will last a little bit over 2 months, if you will. A little bit, I guess more like 2.5 months. We'll come back in about mid-August, so just a little bit after SEC Media Days. In season 3, you'll see a lot of new things, right? We'll have new segments, a new show structure. Oh, and one really new thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adding to the team. We're adding a new team member to the Ball with Y'all family. Before I get too far ahead of myself, in fact, let's hear from my new co-host, Mr. Zach Gray.
Hi, y'all. My name is Zach Gray. About a year or so ago, a friend of mine came together with me, and we had a great idea to start a podcast to talk about football, the South, and what just makes the SEC so good, while touching on a range of other subjects. That friend was our co-host and our co-creator, Shawn Johnson. I grew up in a household full of Wildcat fans. I had family ranging in the Southeast from all the way in Virginia down to Tennessee and up to Kentucky. I was always a Wildcat fan growing up, but living in South Florida, it was tough to find a real true connection to an SEC school. I did an SEC road trip with my father back in 2018, and that's when I stumbled across the Grove. I've never been the same since, and I can honestly tell you I've never been more in love than I was when I first found Ole Miss. So that's me. I'm a Rebel fan on the football field, and I'm a Wildcat fan on the basketball court. I look forward to going through the rest of this season with all of y'all and talking about the best things in the world. Football, the South, and the SEC. And I'm excited to hear from you too about why it means more to you.
And there you have it. The Ball with Y'all family is expanding this fall. Get ready, because before you know it, football season will be here. And of course, the NASCAR playoffs will be right around the corner as well. And that'll do it for season number 2. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for your support throughout this season, for all the topics that we've navigated, all the headlines, all the issues, and more. If you couldn't tell, Zach and I are both pretty excited for what's going to unfold here this fall and beyond, to be fair. And we hope that you'll continue to join us for this ride as well. I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. I hope you have a great summer. And if you could, keep a close eye on SEC Media Days for us as well. We'll talk to y'all soon. And thanks as always for allowing us to talk some ball with y'all.